you guys, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my wrap up for May, and I read quite a bit, not gonna lie. I'm very proud of myself, but I have yet to have all my reviews up, so hopefully that should be up by the time this video goes up. Everything will be linked down below, but let's just kind of get started. One of the things I did in May was I ended up getting a Kindle, so prime reading was kind of my thing, and I had a lot of comic books that I read through. So unfortunately, I don't know how to start comic books or kind of where to start with comic books. So I'm just kind of picking things up at random, and I don't know how to review it properly. So we're just gonna kind of get into it. But the first comic book I read was Black Panther #1 by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Definitely Ta-Nehisi? It's fine. It's fine. But essentially, this is kind of the inception of Black Panther after everything kind of went to hell in his kingdom, and he's trying to pick up the pieces from that. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. I love the art style. I love Black Panther. I love kind of this dive into his character a bit more. However, I struggled with kind of the storytelling aspect. I felt that there were some aspects of the story that were a little muddy. I couldn't tell whose head I was in or what was going on or whose eyes I was seeing it for a bit. So I would have definitely have preferred to have a definitive line there, which is where I dinged it. The next one that I read was Miss Marvel Volume 1 No Normal by G. Willow Wilson. This is a comic book following our Muslim Miss Marvel, who kind of took the place of Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel in the original universe. And she is Muslim. She's trying to figure out her life and see where things kind of go for her, figure out this idea of what she wants. And she ends up being bestowed these powers. Like I said, 4 out of 5 stars. I love the storytelling. I love the diversity that's coming out in comics nowadays. My biggest issue was kind of the art style. I struggled a bit with the art style, but it was still an enjoyable read nonetheless. The next one is Captain Marvel Volume 1, Higher, Further, Faster, More. This is the first volume to kind of Captain Marvel, who is now Carol Danvers' position. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I love this so much to see kind of her, where she is in life, where her, like, what she's doing in space, who she's with, like all these aspects about her, and trying to figure out where she wants to be. Highly recommend, and I highly enjoyed it. The next book I read was The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina #1 by Roberto Aguirre Sacasa. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. I love the story. I love the creepy aspect of it. I just really struggled with the art style. When I was reading it on my Kindle, my eyes were straining a lot to kind of figure out the different shapes from one another. So it was just a bit of a struggle on my end, so I dinged it quite a bit for that one. Oh, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is about, like, essentially Sabrina's beginnings in the world that she's in. It's supposed to be the newer version of Sabrina that's creepier, a little more horror aspect. Definitely creepy with the vibes of it. I enjoyed it, like I said. The next one I read was Flashpoint by Geoff Johns. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. So the Flashpoint is essentially about Barry Allen, who ends up screwing up the timeline and reversing it to a weird dystopian world where everything is incorrect and the Justice League was never around, all because he was never the Flash. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I watched the movie and I highly enjoyed it. However, I struggled a bit with this one because I knew what was going on, but we only got bits and pieces as to what happened between Wonder Woman and Aquaman to get things to kind of really fit. I remember going back a couple times to see if I had missed something, and I didn't, so I wish there was more explanation on that aspect, but other than that, I enjoyed it, and I know there are other Flashpoint comics from these different perspectives, but since this was kind of a standalone comic, I would have really liked to have seen that explanation a bit more in this particular comic. And finally, the last one that I read for the month is Teen Titans Volume 1, Damian Knows Best. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I love the Teen Titans. I love Damian Wayne, who is Bruce Wayne's son. And essentially, this comic follows the inception of the retelling of the Teen Titans. So Damian kind of pulls them all together to fight this big bad guy. I love the art style. I love the characters. My biggest qualm was that Starfire got a little repetitive at times, and I don't know if that's just her character in the comic books or whatnot, but I still enjoyed it, and I want to pick up the rest because I know that this is where we start to see the Teen Titans really form together after Tim Drake's death. Okay, now that that is done, we can get into the books. and I got everything out of order. So we'll just start back here. So one of the books that I read was An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. If you guys don't know, this is a high fantasy, YA high fantasy, where these two characters are essentially slaves to the government they are being put into. Like I said, such a good book with such gorgeous prose and wonderfully fleshed out characters. All the minor characters had a motivation of their own. They weren't flat. They were all very dynamic. I loved each little twist that happened. I loved how the characters met up and this budding kind of romance that's going on. My biggest problem was that it was a little slow and really unclear for me as to how they would have gotten together in the book. But I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to pick up Torch Against the Night and see where the series goes. It was very an emotional read. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I think I cried a couple times and I texted my friend Sam being like, why did you have me read this book? I am in tears, why? But it's fine, it's fine. I suggest heartbreaking books to her all the time, so it's only fair that she does this to me too. I read quite a bit of rereads, but 2 of them are audiobooks, and one of them was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Like I said, I read the audiobook version. I gave that a 5 out of 5 stars, and I will be linking my overall review for this book in the description below. This essentially is a Fleetwood Mac inspired book where you see the inception of this band called Daisy Jones and the Six, how they got together, their kind of trials and tribulations, and ultimately what ended up breaking them apart at the height of their career. Like I said, 5 out of 5 stars. The audiobook is a full cast, so you get literally every bit of pain and suffering with a lot of different voices, and it's all told in oral history, so it's perfect for full cast. But highly recommend it, highly enjoyed it, and I cried again. The next book that I read is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I gave this, I believe, a 4.5 out of 5 stars, so just a little bit of a bump from my original review, which I believe I will also link down below. I don't know how accurate it is to my thoughts. I believe I checked my notes and it seems to be the same thing that I'm thinking now, but I reread this via audiobook, and I would have given the audiobook a full 5 out of 5 stars. I thought the narration was perfect for the book. It gave that sense of ambiance, that mystery, that fantastical element to it. Oh yeah, The Night Circus is about this circus that kind of appears out of nowhere, and these 2 magicians or illusionists inside the circus are competing. They just don't know that they're competing against each other. My biggest problem with the audiobook was that the pacing of how the narrator read the book, I couldn't speed the book up past like I think 1.5. And I was trying to speed the book up because it was still a little slow for me, and I just could not get into it. It was just really slow, and then when I sped up to like maybe 2 times the speed, it ruined kind of the flow and everything, and it's just wasn't sitting right with me, so I ended up switching over to the ebook instead. The next book is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. If you guys don't know, this follows Kath, who writes Simon Snow fanfiction, which is like an offshoot of Harry Potter, essentially, all her life. And now that she's in college, she kind of has to choose between living her life and writing this fanfiction and kind of staying stuck in this bubble. I give this a 5 out of 5 stars. This was super relatable to me, as this was a struggle for me when I was coming to college. And I just loved these characters. I loved this world. I loved Simon Snow and Baz. It was so good. It was so relatable, and I think that anyone who's kind of struggling in a place like a transitional period would really benefit from a book like this. Even if you don't directly write fan fiction, I think it's still something you will glean something off of. So highly, highly recommend. The next book that I read in May was Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Titan's Curse by Rick Riordan. This is the 3rd book in the series, and it follows Percy Jackson as he and his friends are kind of stuck trying to save the world again. Like I said, how many stars? 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this. I love seeing Percy's kind of transition from adolescence into young adulthood with this. He's definitely unsure of his feelings for Annabeth and vice versa. I loved seeing these characters grow, and I like kind of how the stakes are getting higher and higher. My biggest problem with this is that Talia was built up to be this super like badass girl, and she is, but I was expecting to have her more in the series, and her decision at the end kind of like made me feel like all this hype to this prophecy and like whatnot kind of fell a little flat. But I did a book of the week on this, so I will leave that link down below for you guys so you guys know my thoughts as I was kind of like in the very beginning stages of reading this book. The next book I read was actually a poetry collection, and that is Fierce Fairy Tales, Poems and Stories to Stir Your Soul by Nikita Gill. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Well, I felt the message was very clear. I enjoyed it. I felt that it got really repetitive at times, and there were certain aspects of like the poems that I felt like were justifications for some of the abusive behavior that was done by the said fairy tales. And like some of the poetry written in prose tried to read like a poem and not in the sense that it really flowed very well for me. I struggled with it. So I still think that the message is very important, very clear. It just got really repetitive for me. The next book that I read is Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson. I enjoyed this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. If you guys don't know, this follows Melinda in the aftermath of her being sexually assaulted. So clearly a trigger warning for rape, sexual assault, depression, suicidal thoughts, I believe, and self-harm. I enjoyed this. I thought that she was highly relatable. I understood her struggle of like being unable to really talk about things. I think that this is a very important read, and like her humor kind of was the shining star in this book. She still kept that despite kind of the what happened to her. So yeah, highly recommend. The next book that I read in May is They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This follows Mateo and Rufus, who both kind of received this call saying they're going to die in that day. So they find each other through a kind of like Tinder app, essentially, for the dying, and become friends and kind of live out their last days together. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought that, like most Adam Silvera books, this is a wonderfully like heartbreaking novel. His characters are always so fleshed out, and I absolutely enjoyed reading about them and seeing their plights and how they were all connected and how this all kind of came together. And like, did not expect to get as attached to these characters as I did, and now that I am, I'm getting choked up. But I ended up kind of giving it 4 out of 5 stars because while I do enjoy Adam Silvera's writing, I feel like sometimes he is a bit formulaic with his characters. He definitely follows the similar kind of base for characters, and sometimes their journeys are very similar, and it does get a little repetitive, but nonetheless, I highly enjoyed it and I highly recommend it, and that way you all know how heartbreaking this book is. So yeah. So 2 more rereads, and that is The Elite and the one by Kiera Cass. I ended up giving Elite 3 out of 5 stars and the one 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, if you guys don't know, this is essentially, the series follows America Singer who throws her name in a bucket essentially to be picked, to be one of the king's like kind of girls for him to pick from. It's like a weird bachelor / Hunger Games situation. Yeah, I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars because while I did enjoy it, the kind of love triangle, constant whiplash, just didn't make sense to me after a while. Like, you knew who she was going to end up with. Like, regardless, by like the first book you knew. So it was very repetitive in that aspect, and I felt like some of the there's some of the plot twists that were occurring didn't have much of a build up to it, so I would have really liked to have seen that happen a bit more before they were introduced, but nonetheless, I enjoyed it. It holds a very special place in my heart, so we're gonna keep it there. And for the one, like I said, I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this kind of fluffy ending to the first 3 books of the series. My biggest issue was that like towards the end, some of the characters were acting a little bit out of character for me. I wasn't a fan of Maxon's certain reaction to things, considering throughout the entire series he had been shown to be this open-minded, serious person who loved America with all his heart, so to me it didn't really make sense for him to act that way, but I still enjoyed it, still loved the conclusion to the series. It was just so cute. And the last book that I read is actually The Heir by Kiera Cass, which is the 4th book in the Selection series, and this time it's the next generation situation where we follow Eadlyn? I'm gonna say Eadlyn. Eadlyn, who is their daughter, who is now kind of the first girl to undergo the Selection series, and she is very reluctant to it, and I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I like the gender bent aspect. I really enjoyed kind of her perspective on things as a woman and how she kind of has to work through these really annoying situations that people kind of place on her because she is a woman. My biggest struggle was that she just kind of got on my nerves. Her voice kind of bothered me, and she seemed to be a really more stubborn and hard-headed version of America with no kind of push. No, like her pushing didn't make sense to me, and that was my biggest issue. On top of that, I felt that like while America is no longer a title character to this, her voice and her sound as she aged just completely changed to end up being like Maxon's mom, Amberly, and that didn't sit right with me. So 3 out of 5 stars, and I'm probably going to finish the series out in the next coming months. So look out for like a series review maybe. I don't know. But that is it for my wrap up. I read a lot and I'm kind of out of breath and my throat is really dry. So, whew. But if you guys like these videos, leave a comment on what books you have read from this, what books you kind of agreed with my ratings on, all that stuff. Like if you like these videos, subscribe. I upload twice a week, so I'll talk to you guys in the comments and everywhere else. Until then. But yeah, everything's down below if you need me. Same thing with my Goodreads reviews. So, bye!